Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Exorcise Your Rights here on the HWA YouTube channel. Super proud and happy to be over here. Today, we are talking about Back to OmniPark, a horror anthology published by House Blackwood and edited by Ben Thomas and Alicia Hilton, with original work by such luminaries as Jonathan Maberry, Laird Barron, Maxwell I, Brian Evenson, Hailey Piper, Kristi DeMeester, and I also have a little story in there. I don't know about a luminary, but I have a little story in there. For anyone who doesn't know, OmniPark was a theme park. OmniPark is a theme park that was located near Odessa, Texas, from 1977 to 2003, and it's divided into 7 realms. Now, there's been a lot of rumors and fantastic theories circulating around this unique landmark. Many of these are complete fabrications, but what we're after today is the truth about OmniPark. We have Ben Thomas and Laird Barron in the studio today to talk about the origins of this mysterious park, a Kickstarter involved around this, and some of the realms that have made up the entertainment. So let's get to this and find out what all the details are. Hi, welcome you guys. It's so exciting to have you here. Everybody's been trying to get the real scoop on this place. Now we're going to find out. So yeah, introduce yourselves a little bit. Tell us who you are and how you got involved with OmniPark, because that's kind of like one of the key things.
Sure. I'm Ben Thomas. I am the lead editor at House Blackwood. I put together the anthology Tales from OmniPark, which was it made the preliminary ballot for a Bram Stoker Award back in 2020. And then I'm also co-editing Back to OmniPark, which is a prequel anthology set in the early days of OmniPark's genesis, which I'm co-editing with Alicia Hilton. And the Kickstarter is operating right now.
Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Laird Barron, crime writer, horror writer, and actually I was approached by Alicia and Ben to help them, bring out some of the stories, or at least a story on my part about the park.
That's awesome. Well, and going to the Kickstarter, as we're recording this, this is going to be aired on July 1st, but as we're recording this, you guys already have 28 backers. There's 21 days to go on this. You've almost fully funded, and you're not even close to the end of this. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. We have some great rewards that still have not sold out. We're offering Tuckerizations from a few authors. Laird's sold out almost immediately, but as did Brian Evenson's. But we still have one, I believe, from Hailey Piper still available, and Kristi DeMeester, a few other authors. Those are selling like hotcakes right now. We've also got T-shirts, art prints, other rewards as well. So yeah, I encourage people to go check it out. That's
awesome. And the link to that is in the description if you look just down below. Something else that's in the description is a map of OmniPark. It's at omniparkfandom.com. One of the things I've noticed, all of these realms center around the omnicolor fountain. And I feel like there's a significance there. Like maybe it's some kind of, almost looks like a talisman or like generating power. Like what is up with that? I mean, I've heard a lot of rumors about this, this fountain.
Yeah, so first I should give a little bit broader context. OmniPark, for people who don't know, who didn't grow up in Texas or didn't get to visit it, it was divided into 7 realms, and each one is named after a particular area of science. The realm of the deep was based on the sea. There was the realm of the particle, which is about atomic physics. The realm of time, which is about time travel. And all 7 of these were arranged around a central entryway pavilion from which guests would walk out into the 7 realms. And I have a lot of memories from the few times I visited as a kid, just sitting in this pavilion, looking up and seeing these huge banners with the one for the realm of the cell had like weird bacteria on it. The one for the realm of life had these primordial organisms like dragonflies and gigantic lizards. And each one would sort of invite you into that realm. And then at the center of that entryway pavilion building, there was a fountain called the Omnicolor Fountain. And it gave colored light shows a few different times a day. And there actually is a weird backstory about this, which is that was originally the site of a ride, an attraction called the Wild World of Life, which existed, I don't know the exact years off the top of my head, but it was back in the early 80s. And it was an attraction that was designed around the idea that biological life, was a terrifying phenomenon, and that the universe had been beautiful and pure back when it was just minerals, effectively chemical elements, and the ride portrayed life itself as this sort of nemesis. This ride, I honestly don't know quite how it got funded, but it did not do well. It was demolished later that summer, actually, and I think it was a big financial loss for OmniPark. And they built the fountain over the spot where that ride used to exist. So that's as we get into, I'm sure we'll talk about more. There's a lot of these weird little sort of stories in OmniPark's backstory, and that fountain is one sort of a tombstone over this attraction that just did not do well.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Awesome. How about you, Laird? Do you have any knowledge about this? Because the rumors are thick.
I don't have any direct knowledge, but I have a lot of my family on my dad's side hails from Texas, so I have distant relatives who would be well aware of OmniPark and probably visited back in the day. And of course, some of those stories were passed down. I've always been fascinated with the figure of Teague, Dalton Teague, the founder. As a horror writer, I kind of, my specialty is sort of gravitated toward the cosmic, but also sort of the hidden nature of things. That's why I was sort of, interested in taking part in the project. It's just the rumors themselves, such as the fact that perhaps Dalton Teague was, that the whole park was a cover for a much bigger or more sinister. Of course, it's always sinister, right? If it's if it's something that's covered up, but basically that the CIA and Dalton Teague and perhaps other agencies were involved in something clandestine, and that the theme park aspect and that the tourism aspects were a cover, and also obviously revenue to power, to fuel whatever that they were really up to.
Yeah. That's something that's generated a lot of discussion on back in the day, especially when the internet was less moderated and it was more like backpage forums rather than social media as we had today. Mm-hmm. I was part of I will confess, I was part of it was called the OmniParkeology community, a combination of OmniPark and archaeology. There was a lot of that stuff is hard to find now, but back in the day, I used to lurk on the forums a lot. And Dalton Teague in particular, the founder of OmniPark, just generated a lot of controversy because he was a much more reclusive figure than, say, your Walt Disney. He didn't really have a lot of presence in the media, and the only thing that was really known about him at the time was that he was an oil billionaire, had formerly owned an oil company. He definitely did seem to have some kind of government connections. I've seen photos of him with JFK and Bobby Kennedy. I've seen photos of him with the Bush family on his ranch. Of course, those could be doctored. Who knows, really? There's a lot of OmniPark seemed to draw this. It seemed to draw a lot of speculation anytime there was some rumor about that the government was developing extraterrestrial communication or time travel or mind control, like the MK Ultra project. All of this stuff sort of in a labyrinthine way would get linked with OmniPark and with Dalton Teague in some way. And I found that really intriguing.
Right. Yeah. Project Blue Book, Majestic 12.
Yeah, exactly.
UFOlogy seems to figure into at least one line of inquiry or speculation about the true nature of the park. But also wasn't Teague, at least from my research of him, he seemed like he was pretty well traveled.
He was actually. Yeah, that's actually another area that's sparked a whole lot of speculation. Was after he sold his oil company, Omni Oil, this was back in the 60s, he and his wife, Evelyn, started traveling around the world. And the locations that they traveled to sparked a lot of speculation. They traveled to this location in the Arabian desert in some connection with a group of wealthy Arabic sheiks, but it's not really clear why they went there. I guess there was supposed to be some ancient archaeological site in the desert. They also traveled to a number of archaeological sites in the Amazon. They traveled at one point to Antarctica. And it wasn't really clear what the links between all of these destinations were. What they said when they were interviewed about it was just that they wanted to see the world, which is that doesn't really say much. But the links between these places, you can kind of see why this would have generated it. People would sort of fill in the gaps and world build around that. And it generated a lot of theories that they had discovered some kind of clandestine knowledge, something, from outside of Earth or from some pre-human era, and that they were searching for links with some larger cosmic force. So a lot of fascinating speculation about them.
Right.
Well,
I think. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say the speculation seems to have so much basis in reality at times that it is really hard to separate that. And Dalton didn't help it by being so mysterious. It was so hard to get an interview with him. Yeah,
absolutely. He gave, as far as I know, he only gave 2 interviews ever with national news media. He in 1979, he did an interview with Life magazine, in which he didn't really reveal much of any. He was mostly just a publicity article for OmniPark. And then in, I believe it was 83, sometime in the early 80s, he did an interview with NBC, who tried to ask some harder questions, but he had clearly been coached pretty well. He wouldn't say anything about any connections that he had with anybody in the government or anything beyond just that OmniPark was a theme park. He always maintained that the purpose behind the park was just to educate people about science, but from the nature, like I'll say, from the times I went there as a kid, I remember riding a couple of these rides, and they portrayed the cosmos in such strange ways. Like there was a ride called Nebula Quest in the realm of the stars, the space area, the space realm, which involved traveling outside of known space-time and cycling back to the beginning of time and then penetrating back into the cosmos. And it was just, these were very heady concepts for me as a kid. I remember coming off of these rides being like, feeling this excitement that I couldn't quite understand, and also sort of a sense of terror. I felt like it was a little bit too much for me, which I'm sure was part of the point. But anybody who would ride these kind of rides would definitely get the sense that there's more to this park than meets the eye. But Dalton, as you say, was very, very closed mouth about what that purpose actually was.
You had something to say on that, Laird.
Oh, no, the only thing I was going to say is I there were rumors that there was some enmity between him and Disney, but I don't know, because Disney was notorious for having another side and an interest in stuff that like occultism and things like that. You know, I don't know what the truth of it is. I mean, Howard Hughes, right? Another noted eccentric rich guy. But one thing that I find personally fascinating, I don't know what relevance it would have, because I think a lot of this is spurious nonsense, but there's a grain of truth, right? Where there's smoke, there's fire. And his collection of plates from Edward Muybridge, who was the for people who don't know, that was sort of the so-called godfather of motion pictures back in the 1890s or so. He's the one that did the famous picture of the buffalo running. It looks like it's moving, but it's just a bunch of stop motion photography. And there's something about Nebula Quest. It was something about some of the being ahead of its time. I mean, obviously Muybridge was ahead of his time in his day, but I still feel like there's something retro about how Nebula Quest, how it was like doing film capture and laser lighting, that even though they were using really modern techniques, there was something almost retro about that ride, like the visuals of the ride, and that maybe even about the park itself. So it was retro, but futuristic retroism. And I wonder, because Muybridge had a really interesting and sinister sort of background that would make a great film in of its own right. And and the fact that Teague was fascinated with him and actually went to a couple of the places. Muybridge actually sort of disappeared in Central America, working for the army, kind of in the middle of his career. Things kind of got strange for him after that. I mean, later in life, he had mental illness, etc. But they think it stemmed from traumatic experiences that he had in Central America doing surveying for the U.S. government. And I know that Teague also had spent some time in unspecified locations in that area, among others, of course. And I couldn't find what the connection might be, but it just feels like it's on the tip of my tongue, that there's something between some tenuous connection between them. Yeah,
those effects that you're talking about in Nebula Quest, that was one of the weird aspects of the experience at the park, that there were technologies that were used that I can testify had unusual psychological effects that were a little bit hard to pin down. And like you say, it didn't really seem like these were forward-looking technologies so much as that they were things that could have been achieved very simply that could have been achieved, at some point in the past century, but that through the use of the frame rates and the color frequencies of the lights and things like this, that it almost seemed like the technologies had been engineered from first principles in a way to interact with human consciousness and create these sort of weird mind-altering effects. There was this is another even weirder realm that was apparently discussed at some point but wasn't built, that was called the realm of dream. It was going to be based on unconsciousness and the experience of dreaming. And I saw at one point in a forum thread discussions about the realm of dream that included photos that had allegedly been taken from the plans for the original realm, the design schematics. And one of the elements that this was going to include when people walked into the realm was supposed to be a device that would evoke a lucid dreaming state as people walked through it.
Wow.
And and I don't know if that's actually true or if that was even achievable, but just the fact that they even tried to achieve something like that or thought about it, it just shows that the level that they were trying to interface with human consciousness is very strange.
Right. I think also infrasound. I didn't really, when I was writing about the park, I didn't really get into the infrasound, but I think that here, everyone, have a refreshing drink before you go on your ride may have something to do with some of the effects that you're talking about or enhance them. But infrasound is another aspect, and it's something that's been with us in a very primitive form or primordial form since there have been people. I mean, there's a place in California where the wind creates there's a sound garden, essentially volcanic rock, and they now ascribe hallucinations that people have for centuries back to the conquistador era of tall, shadowy beings. Well, scientists have researched and said, a lot of this could have to do with infrasound messing with your, with your frequencies, your electromagnetic frequency, causing you to hallucinate, to hear oral and visual hallucinations. And I think, this is stuff, once again, you're talking about modern technology, but being applied just as a convenience, things that could have been that Teague and his technosophers could have applied if they were putting this part together back in medieval days. Some of this stuff they could have achieved with magic lanterns and pipes, different absolutely. and different acoustics, acoustic methods.
Yeah.
I think this is a great idea to talk about, because this is something that, for example, Disney would use to a lesser extent, using old for example, rear projection techniques from theaters to project the faces of the ghosts in the Haunted Mansion and things like that. So he had a group of people who when Disney was designing the Haunted Mansion, he pulled a group of Imagineers who was Disney's equivalent of technosophers, who were people who had worked in stage magic, and they would use techniques like you're talking about, like the old magic lanterns from the 1800s, and using sound techniques and infrasound, which were also things that had been used in theaters dating back, who even knows how far, to the Bronze Age or further. But it was in the combination of these techniques that produced this cohesive experience that had never really been achieved before. And I think this ties back to what you were saying, Laird, about this sort of rivalry between Disney and Dalton Teague, that Teague used these techniques and these technologies, combined them in similar ways to what Disney might have done, but the effects that Teague and his technosophers were trying to produce were so different from anything that Disney was trying to do. And that's one of the things about OmniPark that continues to fascinate me and that got me into the lore in the first place.
Right. Yeah. I think it had a completely different agenda than whatever was going on at Disney World.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you guys bringing up the occult and some of the other things that you just talked about, because there's the rumors that there's drugs involved, there's hallucinogenics involved, there's occult involved, all kinds of trickery like that. I mean, you're talking about the wind tunnels and stuff. So are you saying that's not involved, or you guys don't know? Or
one thing that I will say is that there is a longstanding assertion I'll call it that, in the fandom, in the community, that OmniPark was built at an intersection of energy lines. At this particular location just outside of Odessa was a place where allegedly there was a group of Native Americans who would go there and conduct some kind of ceremonies. That there's been archaeological evidence. There certainly has been archaeological evidence that there was a Native American population centered in that area as far back as in the Stone Age. Whether that was actually the specific location where they would conduct this ritual, it's hard to say, but this is a long-standing belief that OmniPark was built at this intersection of energy lines. So occultism, you know, in that sense, could be said to factor into the landscape itself. Then you've got the fact that OmniPark was built as a collection of 7 realms, not 8, not 9, not 6, but 7 specifically. 7 is a sacred number. The fact that the 7 realms were arranged around the entryway pavilion in a way that, if you look at it from the top down, it evokes sacred geometry or a Buddhist mandala or something like that. So there's a lot of speculation in the community that one of the ideas that Dalton brought back from his travels was this idea of sacred geometry and of building the park in such a way that it would align with some kind of cosmic intersections or energy lines, or evoke, even maybe serve as a form of communication with some cosmic force. The speculations are of varying degrees of strangeness, but I certainly think that idea, that the fact that it's 7 realms and that they're arranged in that particular way, is pretty intriguing.
Well, and it does seem to be a recurring theme, like even the entryway pavilion. People often talk about it being church-like or like a cathedral, a place of worship.
Yeah, and see, this is one of the other strange things about OmniPark, which is, you know, anybody who's been to Six Flags or to Disneyland, there's a certain atmosphere that tends to go with these kinds of places, right? That is targeted, if it's not kiddie per se, it's targeted at the family as a whole. It's very lighthearted and friendly. Yeah, exactly. That's a great word, frolicking. OmniPark, the entire tone of the place was much more akin to the interior of a religious structure, like you say, a cathedral or a church, than any kind of amusement park or theme park that I've been to. There's one got the strong sense. I remember as a kid stepping into the entryway pavilion, the music that they would pipe in, it wasn't any kind of normal theme park music. It was like tone poem stuff and like the kinds of chorale chants that you would expect to hear in a medieval church. And one thing that I remember thinking was really strange as a kid, sitting in the entryway pavilion, waiting to go into one of the realms, was that people weren't talking and like chattering the way that they would in an ordinary amusement park or theme park. It seemed to evoke this atmosphere in which people felt that they should be silent, and just sort of meditate and observe. And I feel that must have been deliberate. That must have been an effect that was designed to produce.
Well, that actually lines up with another aspect of the various theories, right? I'm not claiming what's true and what's not true, just what I've observed. And what I've observed is, of course, you have the occult aspect, the supernatural aspect, and there's also kind of on the other side, although I think it's inseparable, is cryptozoology is becoming inseparable from UFOlogy. That it's all, maybe it's all alternate dimensions, maybe it's not outer space, maybe it's, you know, something different. But there's the side, though, that looks at this whole thing as like a government project, or if not government, you know, some clandestine group doing off the books, research type of thing. Yeah. And the whole church aspect would line up, because the idea of mass hypnosis or entrancement on some level, keeping everyone in a certain mental state and then being very suggestible. You know, these are
the brainwashing.
Right, well, I was even, and it could be brainwashing. I'm not trying to impugn what goes on in churches, but what I'm getting at is there's this, when you're in a place of worship or in a government building that is designed to awe you and to they're trying to create a certain effect in the people who visit, mental and imbue a certain mental state or put them in a certain mental state, and that would line up with the people who do very vociferously argue that no, this is mind control experimentation by the CIA or the NSA, and that you know, if you think about it, any amusement park, they take pictures of people on the rides, and you can look at the screen. You know, it's all very benign, right? Look at his face, haha, he was terrified. Yeah. Well, what if there's another reason that you want to observe the mental states physical,
Mhm.
physiological, but also psychological that people go through when they go on something like the Nebula Quest, which is not just a
Mhm.
simple ride, but it's several hours. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
you book into this thing and you're there for the afternoon. You go through a journey of the soul,
Mhm.
potentially.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
if you were to have been psychologically tampered with, either through or maybe through a combination of infrasound,
Mhm.
basically hypnosis, mesmerization, and and drugs, psychotropics, that would be a gold mine. And there's just millions of people a year that go through these.
Mhm.
That would be, or several million a year, I suppose. That would just be a gold mine of data.
Absolutely. I do want to talk about that. First, I want to make a little sidebar for the question: were guests at OmniPark given psychotropic substances, hallucinogens? This is something that's obviously provoked a huge amount of speculation over the years. Certainly, this is obviously not something that they could have done openly. There weren't, guests going to buy, psilocybin smoothies or something. It would have been something that would have had to have been slipped in.
It would have
at
been
some point.
selective also.
Right. And because they would have needed a control group and exactly. So this is one of the areas that's been really fruitful for speculation. I will say, I don't even know that psychotropic drugs necessarily would have been necessary, because like you're saying, Laird, you would have had these effects of infrasound, of having images broadcast at certain frequencies like Muybridge did, having light that's at certain color frequencies, and then again, as we're talking about this mass hypnosis effect, those things, as anybody who's gone to a Catholic church service can attest, can produce very powerful psychological effects and a sense of group identity and a sort of dissolution of the self. If you chant with a group of people, you literally do, in a sense, seem to get on the same frequency.
Call and response is a very powerful, ancient, primordial. I mean, since there have been, hominids, call and response has been a part of our evolution. Also, there's one other thing I learned about this, working in a special needs class and having been in the hospital and things like that. Basically, physical therapists will use different sensory techniques, modalities to stimulate parts of the brain. At least that's the theory. I'm a layman. I'm not claiming any expertise in this, but they will put patients in, who have sensory problems, input problems. They will put them in a swing and swing them different directions at different rates, different velocities. I mean, never anything violent, but there is a difference between just counterclockwise and clockwise, direct to and fro. It stimulates different, because your brain obviously moves a little bit when your body moves. Right. There's a working theory that affects the brain. Well, hopefully positively, obviously, but the ride, especially Nebula Quest, one thing was always made about that ride is that all the hyper jumping, that they were simulating. I think that there's something to the frequency of motion, the vibrational frequency going through your body.
I think that's a fascinating area of speculation, because every one of the rides at OmniPark. So I should preface this by saying OmniPark was, as a theme park and not an amusement park, it didn't have roller coasters or, the typical kinds of tilt-a-whirl rides. Every ride at OmniPark was more akin to a carnival dark ride. It was something where you would get in a vehicle on a track, and it would take you through a series of rooms or scenes. And dark rides, as you're saying, Laird, are very easy to program in it. Well, I don't know about easy, but it's possible to control them, the movement of them, very tightly, so that you can have them turning at certain angles, have them rotating back, rotating forward, having them vibrate as they move through different rooms. So I think it's entirely possible that if clockwise or counterclockwise motion, like the ride Nebula Quest, as you're talking about, every time it would rotate between, they were supposedly hyperspace jumps, but really what would happen is the ride vehicle would rotate 360 degrees clockwise, and then
there was a gyroscope, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, it was a gyroscope, and it would come back to the same screen, but you would appear to be somewhere else. So this is something where you could control the rotation in really particular ways, and I can totally see that if that theory is true, that could significantly alter a person's mental state.
Well, there's two things I don't want to, I'll get off this, but one thing is, on the surface, it's very benign, right? It's like you explain that by saying, oh, well, we're just trying to simulate, right? Obviously, we're just trying to simulate that you're going into deep space. And how do we do that? Totally innocent. But I think that there's probably, if you believe the speculation, there's something else going on there, or something additionally. But the other thing is I find fascinating, and this is a connection I wish I would have made earlier. I know that one of the original 5 technosophers that kind of collaborated with Teague on creating the park, that drew up the plans. One of them was a huge fan of Roald Dahl's Willy Wonka, the Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka or Charlie and Chocolate Factory, particularly. And something that's fascinated me for years is the Gene Wilder, when he took them through the dark ride. The rower. He performed the rowers song, which is the doll poem. That talk about one of the scariest. I mean, even just watching it on TV, I think we can all agree that that was pretty amazing. And some people, I think, of the age were kind of traumatized by that few minutes. I cannot help but feel that there was something lifted from that, or inspired some of the thinking behind at least one of the technosophers who was helping engineer this park.
Yeah, I think you're talking about Harry Peel. He was more on the engineering side. He was one of the, I'm going to geek out for a minute. He was one of the 5 original technosophers who was hired by Dalton Teague when OmniPark was being developed. And the concept of a technosopher itself is kind of strange. It's a little bit different from what Disney calls Imagineers. Technosophers were specifically people who were hired because they had backgrounds not only in engineering or storyboarding or whatever that particular skill related to the park design was, but also because they had some other arts background or background in the history of the occult or in literature or in some other area that they felt would bring some sort of unusual perspective to their design work. And so you have Harry Peel with his obsession with Roald Dahl. Another technosopher, Elijah Shattuck, was obsessed with Aleister Crowley and used that theme in some of the designs. So it's, again, you have themes coming in that wouldn't necessarily be associated with the design of a family theme park, but they would percolate through the design of the attractions and the themes that were being passed on in really strange ways.
Sure.
What about of course, we're all aware of the detractors, the people who were very afraid, the protests. Would you say there's any truth to some of the accusations that have happened about the park?
Well, one thing that I do know for sure, because this happened during my lifetime, was that ride, The Wild World of Life, which was destroyed to make way for the Omnicolor Fountain, that I remember seeing news stories as a kid. People actually did go to the hospital, and they claimed that it was because that ride made them sick. I remember I have a sort of childhood memory of seeing a news story about that growing up in Texas. As far as why exactly that happened, it's hard to say. But I know that was one of the first things that sort of started the conspiracy speculation about, is OmniPark really what it seems to be? And if it is making people sick, then why? Is there some sort of motif of harmful sensation thing going on in this ride, like like the Necronomicon, that the people who read it go insane? Or is it something more mundane, such as, it was a very fast-paced ride and the ending involves sort of a vertical plunge. Is that something that just physically made guests sick? Could it be something much more, you get a bunch of people who've eaten fried food and then they go on a ride that does abrupt turns and vertical plunges and they just get physically sick. So sometimes it can be hard to separate that out. A lot of people get sick going to amusement parks and theme parks. What the actual reasons were, there's been a lot of speculation. There's been, like we were talking about, there's been speculation that there was some kind of secret broadcasting technology that the technosophers built to alter people's mental states. There certainly was a lot of movement on the attractions that seemed to be deliberate and seemed to be engineered to produce certain kinds of physical sensations. I feel like exactly describing what the neurological effects of that would have been, that's a little above my pay grade, but it's interesting to speculate about.
That is fascinating. And the thing is, we have to keep in mind, OmniPark, back to OmniPark, features our focus is sort of on what I find to be the real story. And that is what I think there was an evolution of the park. And I think the real story is actually what happened before it ever opened for full-on business. Because I actually think by the time that opened for full-on business, they had conducted quite a bit of their research with test groups, but with the thousands of people who worked on the project and tested the rides and perfected the systems over the course of several years. I think a whole lot of the research was done, if there was research done, was done then. And I'm more, I don't really necessarily find conspiracy theories credible at face value. It's just that there's an overwhelming a number of them,
Mm-hmm.
Lines of inquiry, but also just persistent, persistent questions over the decades. And I actually think it was, to use, air quotes on this, it was clean a lot of the time. But I think if it wasn't, it happened early on and prior to opening, because one of the, you talk about detractors, Angela, a lot of the detractors have to do with, although they've kind of been silenced over the years, had to do more with the draconian and sort of tyrannical way that the workers were treated, that built the park. These ironclad NDAs, the rumors of kind of a, not necessarily militaristic, but certainly a regimented lifestyle. Like they had like a compound that people lived in to build the place.
Yep.
They weren't allowed to have everything was almost like being in prison. They would censor your mail that went out. They would check what came in. Phone calls were monitored if you were allowed to do them. You were not allowed to. You signed a contract where you would stay there for X period of time. There was a rotation. You had to tell them where you were going to go, and it was all under the. I keep saying guys, and I'll go ahead and stick with that. Or at least under the auspice of, well, this is proprietary technology that we're discussing here, and that. Because Teague was cornered on more than one occasion, and he was very coy about it. But yeah, there could be military application. Like, in other words, of course, the military industrial complex might be interested in what we're doing, because what we're doing is benign, but it is scientific research, and we are developing proprietary technology, like the gyroscope and the arm, were things that the military would have been like, "Holy cow, where'd you come up with this?" Because of the brain power that he had helping him innovate this stuff. But yeah, I came across, and that's why I wrote the story that I wrote. My speculation on the whole thing was derived from what was Nebula Quest like before it entered its final form. What was the real ride like? What could it have been like if you were to buy into the speculation?
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about. This is, by the way, the reason why I wanted to do this anthology back to OmniPark, and do an anthology that was particularly set during the period OmniPark was being developed and built. Is a lot of the most intriguing speculation centers on the early, before the park actually was opened to the public. Was it originally constructed to do for some other purpose, and then it was converted into a theme park?
Right.
So this is something that's that's really fascinating for me, because certain things are just documented fact. Like, as you said, Laird, the people who originally built the park were not allowed to have contact with the outside world while they were working on it. They had to move on site and live there full time. The technosophers, the 5 people who were designing the rides, worked very closely with Dalton Teague, and were known to not communicate with the rest of the staff very well. They would just sort of hand out briefs. So there was a lot of need to know, sort of like a government agency, a lot of need to know dynamics happening. And then there's the fact that before the park was opened, there were thousands of guests who were let in ostensibly for a testing period to test the attractions and make sure that everything was functioning. But a lot of those people also had to sign NDAs. So
focus groups, right?
Yeah,
focus groups. Yes,
right. And of course, as you said, Laird, it's like when you have an NDA, you don't necessarily, or when you have a project like this that's proprietary, you don't necessarily want this information to get out. So it's normal to have people signing NDAs. But then the things that they were signing NDAs about, it later starts to come out is this strange proprietary technology that people are claiming has mind-altering or even body-altering effects. Research that people are later going to claim is being used for all kinds of bizarre things: genetic engineering, mind control, time travel. And then so you can see how that kind of gets read back onto the NDAs and say, well, what did these people participate in that they're not allowed to talk about?
Well, right. And no matter how benevolent a project is, people are going to find, especially if there's any secrecy, oh, what is it really? Which, so in other words, a lot of this could simply just be that. It could just be nature abhors a vacuum. And so if you don't have an explanation for everything, a certain sector of the public will fill it in. But the fact of the matter is, it was something like 24 people died building that park, and you don't hear about that. And many more were injured. And certainly there've been projects that are far more, statistically deadly, but it was just how secretive and Disneyland is the same way. When people die on site, they have, especially if it's a worker, they try to sneak them out through their underground passage. They don't want to disrupt the immersion. And I think, whatever was going on in Teague's mind, like I said, he could have just been a little bit nutty. I mean, Hughes, didn't really have an ulterior motive. He was just sort of a little bit eccentric. But the bottom line is a few people died. A lot of people were injured, and others had lifelong ailments that they swear, the ones who will break their NDAs to any degree swear came from the very dangerous and rigorous testing that they did of the rides. And it was a lot of crashes and explosions and implosions and just disappearances. A few people disappeared from the park. No guests that I know of, but certainly some of the workers, either they left in the middle of the night, which wouldn't shock me, or something happened to them. But there's all that kind of swirling around the project. It was, I think the last thing Teague wanted was to get the whole, the pyramids are cursed kind of thing going on.
Right.
But,
yeah, there actually is a line of speculation about that, which I think is pretty far out there, but that was deliberate, that there was some kind of a blood sacrifice that had to be conducted in order for the park to be built. I've read some forum threads that connected point by point that idea to the idea of that this was built on an ancient Native American ceremonial site, and that linked that idea with blood sacrifice, which gets into all kinds of racist nonsense that I really don't really want to get into. But still, there's this. You can see how people kind of draw these connections of, there was a Native American ceremonial site there, and then there was this theme park built there, and it also has 7 realms arrayed around the central axis, and people died building the park, and that was covered up, and it was so you can see how a certain kind of mind would draw the connection. That was a blood sacrifice, and
I think that's scared off legitimate. I think that the racists and the bigots and the whatnot and the just people of that ilk have driven off more legitimate inquiry.
That's actually a good point. Yes, because one thing that we haven't really talked about yet is what if there was an ulterior purpose, what actually was it? Was it just a theme park, or was there some other reason that it was built? Not necessarily a sinister reason, but was there some ulterior goal behind the project? And that's something that's fueled a huge amount of speculation too. Was it just scientific education? Was there a more spiritual purpose? Was Dalton researching some project or some group of projects for some other organization? And that's something that I've heard a huge amount of speculation about too.
Space travel was I don't know if you've heard, Angela, but space, different methods of space travel, of exceeding, they figured out that, we now know that faster than light's not realistic. But there was still, the argument that, there must be, what if you went through a wormhole? Are there ways to get around that? Is there really a tachyon, that kind of thing? And so that was what I kept running into. Like I said, a lot of mine was more, my research kept running into the conspiracy theories that were more technologically grounded. I mean, they incorporate all this stuff, but they come at it from the UFO side of it, or the government messing around with, weaponry or travel, space travel. And that is one of the arguments, is that the idea that, and this would also tie into why they might have been using mind altering methods, is that projecting instead of using a ship, the ship is just there to have you. It's kind of a shell, but that if you travel, you're going to use astral projection or some kind of mental projection to send yourself somewhere, to literally imagine yourself somewhere, which would tie in with the occult side of it, with the ritualistic side of it. And obviously, we know for a fact that the government, many governments have experimented with remote viewing. Like, that is a legitimate, I don't know whether it works or not, but they certainly have investigated it.
Yeah, for sure. MK Ultra investigated that. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, these are things that the government, we do know that the government has allegedly abandoned, but they looked into telekinesis, telepathy, all that kind of stuff. And it seems to me that whether it was legitimate science or not, I wouldn't be shocked if they, if you did find out that this was true, that that would be one of the motives, is, because NASA was allegedly involved on some level early on, but not really. But they were definitely taking cues from NASA, and NASA, would eventually maybe benefit if they would have come up with something, and obviously nothing ever came of it, at least publicly. But I kept running into, he was doing it because he wanted to figure out for us to escape the solar system, essentially.
There was a lot of speculation around what you're touching on, that also, that research that they were doing into consciousness. So you can see how this would have fueled conspiracy theories about trying to project consciousness to other places, because as I mentioned before, originally was planned but never actually built the realm of dream, which was going to be about the subconscious and dreaming consciousness. Also, this is something else that it was a little bit before my time, but this is actually documented fact that the realm of man, as it was called, probably not a gender neutral term as we use today, but it was called the realm of man, and it was about the history of humankind, basically, and our pre-human ancestors. That realm was originally called the realm of mind, and it was arranged around the idea of human consciousness and the exploration of human consciousness, and that was rebuilt, I guess you'd say, into the realm of man in the early 80s. And one of the reasons that it's speculated was that the realm of mind in particular was drawing a lot of visits from Ken Kesey and Timothy Leary and people who were in the psychedelic community, and that OmniPark didn't want that kind of publicity of being associated with that side of culture. But in fact, there was actually a ride called it was called The Mystery of Consciousness or something like that. It existed back in the 70s, and it was a first-person journey through human consciousness and the experience of being in various altered states. So there were these connections where not only were they working on the technological, or allegedly working on the technological side of things like space travel, but then also there was definitely a leaning towards the mystery of consciousness and what is consciousness, and is it possible to understand it scientifically. And then the other side of the strange research that draws a lot of speculation is there was, in the realm of the stars, there was a theme of extraterrestrial communication. So there was a lot of speculation that I've read, some of it more coherent than others, that OmniPark had some facility where they were trying to communicate with extraterrestrials, or some speculation that they had actually succeeded and that was influencing the design or the function of the park in some way. You remember this was the late 70s, early 80s when OmniPark was built, was the golden age of SETI and Carl Sagan's gold record being sent out into space, and it was a topic that was on a lot of people's minds. So extraterrestrial communication, or building some technology for that, was another thing that drew a lot of conspiratorial speculation. And then there was some even stranger stuff. There was a realm called the realm of time, which had a ride that was based on H.G. Wells's Time Machine novel. And there was speculation that OmniPark technosophers had either built or were trying to build a device for time travel, which, as far as I know, is considered to be scientifically impossible. Stephen Hawking actually wrote an article for Omni magazine, not related to OmniPark, but this was back in the 80s. Wrote an article for a magazine called Omni about how time travel was scientifically impossible and explaining all the reasoning behind that. But that didn't really silence the speculation. So you've got some of these technologies for things like space travel. You can see that it's sort of grounded in similar government conspiracy theories about things like Area 51. And then you've got things like time travel and dimensional portals that's really far out there. But that's the diversity of the realms in OmniPark inspired a lot of speculation along a lot of strange lines.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate both of you coming on here you guys are some of the leading experts on OmniPark, which continues to this day, despite the fact that it is closed, continues to speculate. I mean, to generate all the speculation and rumor and I'm going to say fear. I have one final question for you guys, and I would love to follow up and do more interviews like this, because obviously OmniPark is an infinite subject that we could tap into for all the different aspects of it. As some of the leading experts, what would you guys say the truth is behind everything? What is your theory on what Dalton was really doing?
Well, I don't know that I would say I'm a leading expert. I've just read a lot of forum threads about OmniPark. I just kind of geeked out about the rabbit hole. I honestly, I would say what I lean toward is that Dalton Teague seems to have had an almost spiritual relationship with science, if that makes any sense. So in the same way that if you watch an old like Carl Sagan series like Cosmos, it evokes these almost spiritual feelings of awe about the physical universe and about discoveries about the scale and the age of the cosmos. I don't know that necessarily you need any more speculation beyond that this was something that Dalton Teague personally felt very deeply, in the same way that Walt Disney felt a very deep connection to childhood and the innocence of childhood. I think this was a feeling that Dalton Teague was trying to help people access for all kinds of reasons, because it would inspire people to be more responsible about the planet, more interested in research, reading about scientific discoveries and being educated. I know that sounds kind of mundane compared to all the mind control and extraterrestrial communication stuff, but I think it's plausible. I don't think you necessarily need anything stranger than that.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you're saying not sinister. You think not sinister?
Yeah, I don't think sinister so much as just to change people's minds about the world and the nature of reality in ways that were ultimately well-intentioned.
Okay.
I'm going to go kind of the similar, but there's a little difference. I actually think that there's some truth to that. I don't, angel or devil, I don't think he was either. I think he probably had good intentions. However, I also think, despite kind of having an iron grip on it and a vision, I actually think that the park became factionalized, and that there was a lot of stuff, competing agendas in the park. Now, whether there was anything sinister going on or supernatural, etc., I can't tell you that, but I can tell you that there were competing agendas, and that, ironically, there probably was a conspiracy, because I think different departments or different areas of the park were almost, even though it was all sort of interconnected, or was interconnected, they still operated in their own little vacuums when they were putting things together, and how they operated almost like cells of a structure, like say an intelligent structure. And so I do really strongly feel that it may have been mundane budgeting, who gets the most attention, who gets the most likes before there were likes per month, but I do think it was factionalized, and I think that bears a lot more scrutiny in the future, for future inquiry.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, both of you. We've run out of time. I do want to urge everybody to go right now and fund this Kickstarter so that we can continue the OmniPark project here, because we have not even begun to tap into this. And I invite both of you on again to discuss this further, because like I said, we haven't even dipped into the realms. I have so many more questions, but thank you both for your time. And everybody, please go support the Kickstarter so we can uncover all of this.
Yeah. So thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Angela.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are a joy.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.